Welcome to Animal Uncovered, the podcast where we explore the most unbelievable life cycles in the natural world. From the moment life begins to the moment it ends, nothing is as simple as it seems. There's a moment in the dry scrublands of eastern Australia when time seems to compress into a single heartbeat. A kookaburra descends from a eucalyptus branch, talons extended, eyes locked on movement below. The target is slow, improbably slow for a creature with so many predators. A blue-tongued skink basking in the filtered morning light has nowhere to run. And then it happens. The skink's mouth opens wide. From within that blunt, almost dog-like head, a tongue unfurls, electric blue, impossibly vivid, like a piece of tropical ocean that somehow ended up in the Australian bush. The tongue flicks. Once. Twice. The skink holds its ground, body inflated, a low hiss building in its throat. The kookaburra pulls up, banks left, chooses a different breakfast. What you've just witnessed is not an accident of evolution. It's a calculated strategy refined over millions of years. The blue-tongued skink doesn't run because it doesn't need to. It has weaponized the color blue, one of the rarest colors in nature, and turned it into a survival mechanism so effective that it can stop a predator mid-strike with nothing but theatre. Today we're exploring the extraordinary biology of one of Australia's most successful reptiles. Not the fastest, not the largest, certainly not the most aggressive, but perhaps one of the most brilliantly adapted lizards on the continent. This is the story of the blue-tongued skink and how it turned slowness into strategy, bluffing into an art form, and a blue tongue into one of nature's most effective warning signals. Part 1. To understand the blue-tongued skink, we need to first appreciate what it is not. It is not built for speed. While many lizards rely on explosive acceleration to escape danger, think of the frilled lizard sprinting on its hind legs or the fleet-footed whiptails of the American Southwest. The blue-tongued skink moves through the world at what can only be described as a leisurely waddle. Its legs are short, positioned at the sides of its body rather than underneath, and its movements have an almost reptilian languor that seems, on the surface, to invite predation. It is not venomous. It has no fangs, no toxic saliva, no chemical weaponry beyond what any animal produces naturally. It is not armoured, not particularly aggressive, and not camouflaged beyond the mottled browns and greys common to many Australian reptiles. So how has it survived? How has this slow, seemingly defenceless lizard become one of the most widespread and successful reptiles in Australia? The answer lies in understanding evolutionary trade-offs. Blue-tongued skinks belong to the genus Tiliqua, part of the skink family Cincidae, the most diverse family of lizards on Earth, with over 1,500 species distributed across every continent except Antarctica. Within this sprawling family tree, the blue-tongued skinks occupy a fascinating niche. They are members of the subfamily Egernianae, a group that includes some of Australia's most charismatic reptiles, the shinglebacks, the land mullets, the desert skinks. What unites many of these lizards is a shared evolutionary strategy. They traded speed for other advantages. In the harsh, unpredictable environments of Australia, where droughts can last for years and food availability fluctuates wildly, being a generalist became more valuable than being a specialist. Blue-tongued skinks evolved stout bodies capable of storing fat reserves. They developed broad omnivorous diets that allowed them to exploit whatever food sources appeared. They invested in reproductive strategies that gave their offspring the best possible start. And crucially, they developed defensive mechanisms that didn't require them to outrun anything. There are several species of blue-tongued skink scattered across Australia, Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea. The eastern blue-tongue, Tiliqua syncoides, is perhaps the most familiar, ranging along the eastern coast from Queensland down through New South Wales and into Victoria. The northern blue-tongue inhabits the tropical regions. The western blue-tongue prefers the arid interior. Each has adapted to its particular environment, but all share the same basic body plan: heavy-set, short-legged, and armed with that extraordinary blue tongue. Their slow movement is not a flaw, it's a feature. By moving deliberately, by conserving energy, by not wasting resources on constant vigilance and explosive flight, the blue-tongued skink has optimized for long-term survival in an environment where tomorrow's meal is never guaranteed. They can go weeks without food if necessary. They can thermoregulate efficiently, requiring less basking time than more active lizards. They can occupy territories that would be too energy expensive for faster, more metabolically demanding species. And when threatened, they don't run, they perform. Part 2. The story of every blue-tongued skink begins not in an egg, but inside its mother. This is worth pausing on because most reptiles don't do this. The vast majority of lizards and snakes are oviparous, egg layers. The female deposits eggs in a carefully chosen location and then, in most cases, departs. The eggs are on their own, vulnerable to temperature fluctuations, predators, and environmental catastrophes. Development happens externally, subject to whatever conditions the world provides. Blue-tongued skinks took a different path. They are viviparous, live-bearers. The embryos develop inside the mother's body, nourished through a placental-like connection that exchanges nutrients, oxygen, and waste products across specialized membranes. This is not true placentation as we see in mammals, but it's remarkably close, a case of convergent evolution where two completely different lineages arrived at similar solutions to the same problem. Why would a lizard evolve live birth? The answer appears to be environmental insurance. In Australia's variable climate, where ground temperatures can swing wildly and safe nesting sites may be scarce, carrying your young internally provides a level of protection that buried eggs simply cannot match. The mother becomes a mobile incubator, able to thermoregulate for her developing offspring, to move to safer locations if threatened, to buffer them against the worst extremes of temperature and drought. Gestation lasts approximately 4 months, an enormous investment for a reptile. During this time, the female's body becomes a complex life support system. Nutrients flow across the placental structures. Waste products are filtered and removed. The developing embryos grow from tiny cellular clusters into fully formed miniature skinks, complete with functioning organs, scales, and of course those distinctive blue tongues. A typical litter contains between 10 and 20 offspring, though this varies by species and the mother's condition. Each baby develops within its own thin membranous sac, a vestigial remnant of the egg, now reduced to a transparent wrapper that tears open at birth. And then, on a warm summer day, usually between December and February in eastern Australia, the moment arrives. The mother finds a secure location under a log within a rock crevice, somewhere sheltered from both predators and the harsh midday sun, and one by one the young emerge. Part 3. They come into the world ready. This is perhaps the most striking thing about blue-tongued skink reproduction. There is no helpless stage, no blind, naked hatchlings requiring parental care, no extended period of vulnerability. The newborn skinks are approximately 10 to 15 centimeters long, perfectly proportioned miniatures of the adults they'll become. Their scales are already fully formed, their coloration complete. Within minutes of birth they're moving, cautiously at first, testing their limbs, orienting to the new sensory landscape of life outside the womb. Within hours they've dispersed. There is no parental care in blue-tongued skinks. The mother does not guard her offspring, does not teach them to hunt, does not provide food or protection. This might seem harsh by mammalian standards, but it's precisely calibrated to their ecological niche. The mother has already made an enormous investment, 4 months of carrying developing young, providing them with nutrients, protecting them internally. By the time they're born, they're already equipped with everything they need to survive. Instinct guides them to shelter. Instinct tells them to remain still during the heat of the day. Instinct drives them toward food sources, the smell of decomposing fruit, the movement of insects, the chemical signatures of snails and slugs. Their chances are not particularly good. Predation rates on juvenile skinks are high. Kookaburras, currawongs, butcherbirds, and larger lizards all consider young blue tongues nutritious meal. Snakes, both venomous and constrictors, pose constant threats. Even domestic cats and dogs, in areas where human habitation overlaps with skink territory, can devastate local populations of juveniles. Survival to adulthood likely hovers around 20 to 30%, though precise figures are difficult to obtain in wild populations. But those that do survive carry with them, from their very first day of life, the same defensive strategy that has served their species for millions of years. When threatened, they don't run. They open their mouths, they show the blue, and remarkably, even at just a few hours old, it works. Part 4. Let's talk about that tongue, because really, the tongue is the centerpiece of the entire blue-tongued skink story. It's the feature that gives them their common name, the aspect of their biology that most fascinates researchers and casual observers alike. And it represents one of the most elegant examples of aposematic coloration, warning signals, in the reptile world. The blue color itself is extraordinary. It's not a pigment in the traditional sense. The tongue doesn't contain blue dye molecules like you might find in a berry or a flower. Instead, the color is produced through structural coloration, a phenomenon where microscopic structures scatter light in such a way that specific wavelengths are reflected back to the observer. This is the same principle that makes the sky blue, that gives certain butterfly wings their iridescent shimmer. In the blue-tongued skink, specialized cells in the tongue tissue contain arrangements of proteins and other molecules that preferentially reflect blue light, while absorbing other wavelengths. The result is a blue so vivid, so saturated that it seems almost artificial, like something that belongs in a coral reef rather than the Australian bush. But why blue specifically? Research suggests that the blue tongue exploits a perceptual vulnerability in predator vision. Many of the skink's primary predators, birds, snakes, and monitor lizards, have excellent color vision. Blue is relatively rare in terrestrial prey animals, and when it does appear, it's often associated with toxicity or unpalatability. Think of blue poison dart frogs, certain blue butterflies, blue-ringed octopus. The skink's tongue, suddenly revealed against the pink interior of its mouth and the earth-toned browns of its body, creates a visual shock. The contrast is jarring, unexpected. In the split second that a predator requires to process this information, to determine whether this blue thing represents danger, the skink gains a crucial advantage. But the tongue is only part of the performance. A threatened blue-tongued skink doesn't just flash its tongue passively. It engages in a coordinated defensive display that involves multiple sensory channels. The mouth gapes wide, maximizing the visible area of the blue tongue. The body inflates, making the skink appear larger and more formidable. The tail may curl or wave, and crucially the skink produces a loud, sustained hiss. a sound that's surprisingly intimidating coming from what is essentially a small lizard. This is theatre. Pure instinctual theatre refined over millions of years, and it works astonishingly well. Studies conducted on blue-tongued skink defensive behaviour have shown that the tongue display is effective against a wide range of predators. Birds in particular seem highly sensitive to the blue colour, often aborting attacks immediately upon seeing the tongue. Even human observers report finding the display startling, despite knowing intellectually that the skink poses no threat. What makes this strategy particularly elegant is its low cost. The skink doesn't need to produce venom, doesn't need to develop thick armour, doesn't need to evolve neurotoxins or caustic secretions. It just needs to look dangerous for a few seconds. It needs to create enough doubt, enough hesitation, that the predator decides the risk isn't worth the reward. This is bluffing at its evolutionary finest. And for a slow-moving lizard in a landscape full of predators, it's the difference between becoming lunch and living another day. Part 5. Assuming the young skink survives its first few weeks, avoiding predators, finding shelter, learning the rhythms of its environment, it faces the next fundamental challenge: finding food. Here, the blue-tongued skink reveals another aspect of its evolutionary success: dietary flexibility. These are true omnivores, capable of extracting nutrition from a remarkably diverse array of food sources. Unlike specialized predators that depend on specific prey items, or herbivores that require particular plant species, blue-tongued skinks are opportunistic generalists. They eat what's available, when it's available, and their bodies are adapted to process it all. A typical blue-tongued skink's diet might include insects, beetles, crickets, grasshoppers, cockroaches. They consume snails and slugs, using their powerful jaws to crush shells that would stymie many other predators. They eat carrion when they find it, taking advantage of protein sources that other animals have killed. They consume fallen fruit, berries, flowers, and tender plant shoots. They've been observed eating bird eggs, small vertebrates, and even other lizards on occasion. This dietary breadth is supported by specialized anatomy. The skink's jaws are broad and powerful, designed for crushing rather than tearing. Their teeth are small but numerous, blunt-topped and set back in the jaw. Perfect for grinding through shell, plant matter, and insect exoskeletons alike. The digestive system is relatively long and complex for a reptile, allowing efficient extraction of nutrients from both animal and plant sources. They're not particularly fast predators. They don't chase down prey with bursts of speed. Instead, they hunt through patient stalking and opportunistic encounters. A skink might spend hours slowly patrolling its territory, tongue flicking constantly to sample chemical cues in the air, pausing whenever something interesting registers. That tongue, incidentally, serves double duty. When not being deployed as a defensive weapon, it functions as a highly sensitive chemosensory organ, similar to a snake's but less specialized. The forked tips of the tongue collect scent particles from the environment and deliver them to the vomeronasal organ in the roof of the mouth, where they're analyzed for information about food, potential mates, and threats. The skink's slow metabolism is an advantage here. They don't need to eat every day. In favorable conditions, a large meal, a clutch of snail eggs, a significant piece of carrion, a generous scattering of fallen fruit can sustain them for a week or more. During cooler months when their activity levels drop and thermoregulation becomes less demanding, they may go weeks between substantial meals. This metabolic thrift, combined with dietary flexibility, allows blue-tongued skinks to survive in environments where more specialized lizards would struggle. When insect populations crash during drought, they can switch to plant matter. When plant growth slows, they can focus on carrion and opportunistic predation. When coastal populations encounter human-modified landscapes, they readily adapt, consuming pet food, garden snails, and ornamental fruits. They're survivors in the truest sense, not because they're dominant or aggressive, but because they can adjust, can improvise, and can extract calories from whatever the environment provides. And they do so while barely moving faster than a brisk human walking pace. Part 6. As the young skink matures, a process that takes roughly 2 to 3 years, it settles into the rhythms of adult life. These are, by reptilian standards, remarkably intelligent animals. Blue-tongued skinks demonstrate learning capabilities that exceed many other lizards. In captive studies, they've shown the ability to navigate mazes, to associate specific locations with food rewards, to remember solutions to problems over extended periods. Wild observations suggest they maintain detailed spatial maps of their territories, returning to favoured basking sites, shelter locations, and productive foraging areas with consistency that implies memory rather than random wandering. They also show individual personality variation, a trait once thought to be largely absent in reptiles. Some individuals are bold, readily investigating novel objects and situations. Others are cautious, preferring familiar routines and retreating at the first sign of disturbance. Some are more aggressive in their defensive displays, while others rely more heavily on cryptic behaviour and remaining motionless. These personality differences appear to be consistent over time and likely reflect genuine variation in behavioural strategies rather than random fluctuation. A typical day in the life of an adult blue-tongued skink follows a predictable thermal pattern. They are ectothermic, reliant on external heat sources to regulate body temperature. Morning begins with emergence from overnight shelter, followed by basking. They position themselves in patches of sunlight, often half concealed under vegetation or beside rocks, where they can absorb solar radiation while maintaining some protection from aerial predators. As body temperature rises toward optimal range, roughly 28 to 32 degrees Celsius, activity levels increase. This is when foraging happens, when territorial patrols occur, when the serious business of finding food and avoiding becoming food takes place. Midday during the Australian summer can be brutally hot, and skinks respond by retreating to shelter, under logs, into hollow trees, beneath rock piles, inside abandoned burrows. They become inactive, conserving water and avoiding potentially lethal overheating. Late afternoon brings a second activity period as temperatures moderate. More foraging, more territorial movement, perhaps an encounter with a neighbour that results in defensive posturing and careful assessment. As darkness falls, the skink retreats to its chosen shelter for the night. Body temperature drops, metabolism slows. The lizard enters a state of torpor that will last until morning sun triggers the cycle again. This pattern varies seasonally. During winter months in southern Australia, activity decreases dramatically. Blue-tongued skinks enter a period of brumation, a reptilian equivalent of hibernation, though less profound. They remain in sheltered locations, inactive for weeks at a time, emerging only occasionally on warmer days to bask briefly before retreating again. It's during this winter brumation that physiological changes occur that will enable reproduction in the following spring. Hormones shift, reproductive organs develop. By the time September arrives and temperatures begin climbing again, the skinks emerge ready to breed. Mating itself is relatively brief and, frankly, rather ungraceful. Males pursue females, often engaging in biting and aggressive positioning. Copulation occurs, internal fertilization takes place, and then the long process of gestation begins. The cycle continues. Another generation preparing to enter the world, fully formed and ready to perform that same blue-tongued bluff that has worked so reliably for so long. Part 7. For all their adaptations, all their evolutionary success, blue-tongued skinks face challenges in the modern Australian landscape. Habitat loss is perhaps the most significant threat. As urban development expands, as agricultural land consumes native bushland, the skink's territories fragment. Populations become isolated, genetic diversity decreases, and the risk of local extinction increases. Roads are particular death traps. Blue-tongued skinks moving at their characteristic slow pace are utterly incapable of avoiding vehicles. Their defensive strategy, stopping, inflating, showing the blue tongue, is spectacularly ineffective against a car travelling at 60 kilometers per hour. Road mortality accounts for significant numbers of adult skinks, particularly during the breeding season when males are actively searching for mates and females are moving to suitable birthing locations. Invasive predators compound the problem. Domestic and feral cats kill enormous numbers of reptiles across Australia, and blue-tongued skinks, despite their defensive displays, are not immune. Foxes, introduced to Australia in the 19th century for hunting, have proven to be efficient predators of skinks. In some areas, invasive cane toads compete for food resources and may even prey on juvenile skinks. The pet trade represents another pressure. Blue-tongued skinks are popular in the exotic pet market, valued for their manageable size, relatively docile temperament, and of course, that striking blue tongue. While captive breeding has reduced wild collection pressure in some areas, illegal collection still occurs, and the export of wild-caught individuals to international markets continues in some regions. Climate change adds an additional layer of uncertainty. As temperatures rise and rainfall patterns shift, the carefully calibrated behaviours that allow skinks to thermoregulate and exploit seasonal food resources may become misaligned with environmental conditions. Extended droughts could reduce food availability beyond their considerable tolerance. Increased frequency of extreme heat events could shrink the temporal windows available for activity. Yet blue-tongued skinks persist. They're not listed as endangered across most of their range. Some species face greater pressures than others. The Adelaide pygmy blue tongue was actually thought extinct for decades before being rediscovered in the 1990s, but the common species remain relatively widespread. They adapt to human-modified landscapes with surprising resilience. Suburban gardens, if they contain adequate shelter and varied vegetation, can support healthy populations. Rural properties with remnant bushland, livestock water sources, and diverse prey communities often harbour robust skink populations. In captivity, properly cared for blue-tongued skinks can live 20 years or more, an extraordinary lifespan for a lizard. Wild individuals likely live somewhat shorter lives on average, facing predation and environmental challenges that captive animals avoid, but decade-long lifespans are certainly possible for successful individuals. Conservation efforts, where they exist, focus primarily on habitat preservation and connection. Maintaining corridors of native vegetation between population centres allows genetic exchange and recolonization of areas where local populations may have declined. Road mitigation strategies, underpasses, wildlife crossings, signage in high-density areas can reduce mortality. Education programs that discourage killing of reptiles and promote coexistence have proven effective in some communities. The blue-tongued skink, it turns out, doesn't need intensive conservation intervention so much as it needs space to exist and human awareness of its presence. Give it habitat, give it time, give it the opportunity to continue the same strategies that have served it for millions of years, and it will likely still be here, waddling through the Australian bush, blue-tongue ready, long after we're gone. Part 8. As I write this, somewhere in eastern Australia, a blue-tongued skink is basking on a sun-warmed rock. Its body temperature is climbing toward optimal. Chemical signals are drifting across its tongue, providing information about the world, food nearby perhaps, a potential threat, the complex chemical landscape that constitutes its sensory reality. In a few moments, it will move, not quickly, never quickly. It will waddle toward whatever has captured its attention, legs splayed, belly close to the ground, looking for all the world like an animal that has no business surviving in a landscape full of things that want to kill it. But it will survive. Well, statistically it probably won't. Most individuals don't reach reproductive age, don't pass on their genes, and don't contribute to the next generation. But some will. Some always do. And those that do will carry forward the same strategies, the same adaptations, the same blue tongue that has served their lineage for more time than our species has existed. They will be born fully formed, completely independent, ready to face the world with nothing but instinct and that extraordinary blue warning signal. They will eat whatever they find, beetle or berry, snail or strawberry. They will regulate their temperature with precision, will navigate their territories with remembered accuracy, will respond to threats with a performance that seems absurd until you realize it works. They will mate, gestate, and give birth to the next generation of slow-moving blue-tongued bluffers. And the cycle will continue, as it has continued, as it will likely continue long after the current challenges facing these remarkable reptiles have passed or been overcome. Because in the end, survival doesn't always belong to the fastest or the fiercest. Sometimes it belongs to the patient, to the adaptable, to the creature that learned, somewhere in the deep evolutionary past, that you don't need to run from everything that scares you. Sometimes you just need to open your mouth, show them something they weren't expecting, and trust that millions of years of natural selection have equipped you with exactly what you need to make them think twice. The blue-tongued skink has placed its evolutionary bet on bluffing, on patience, on metabolic thrift and dietary flexibility, and a reproductive strategy that prioritizes quality over quantity. And for now, in the Australian landscape it has inhabited for millions of years, that bet continues to pay off. One slow waddle at a time, one blue-tongued warning at a time, one more generation finding its way in a world that has never made survival easy, but has never quite managed to eliminate the small, slow, remarkably confident lizard that turned the colour blue into a weapon. If you enjoyed this episode of Animal Uncovered, following the podcast is the best way to support the show. And if there's an animal you want us to uncover next, leave a review or comment and let us know. Until next time.